Hello, everybody. I'd like to sort of share more sort of personal experience with medical astrology and how it's affected me in my life and certain timing. And this is sort of as deep as it goes for me. I'm going to talk about my experience with depression and Saturn, specifically Saturn's role in my illness, as it were. I had Lyme disease. So what I have up here, you can just kind of barely see something written up here. I have it zoomed in to see the chart better, but it says chronic autoimmune disease begins, which is essentially what. So this is my chart on the inside, and on the outside were where the planets all were on one specific day. And so this isn't technically the beginning of my chronic autoimmune disease issues. I had Lyme disease. I'd been infected a couple of times, maybe like a year and a half apart, and I took antibiotics for 30 days each time and sort of felt better, and then after a while symptoms started coming back, and I'd sort of been dealing with that for at least a couple years. And but on this particular day was the day that this was my last day of working. I was like a at-home dad with a young 1-year-old at the time, and then working at night sometimes at this place where sometimes we work till like 12, 1 in the morning. And my health had already been declining, and I wasn't able to sleep, especially I got into a cycle of staying up late from working so late. I just got used to being up late, and I was having to get up early to be with the kid, and I was starting to sort of physically really be drained, and this was sort of like the end of my being able to work at all, and I was really starting to suffer a lot at this point. But I'll step back before I jump into this date, and I'll say that for the 2 or 3 years that I'd been dealing with Lyme, as it were, and autoimmune issues, I would get sick. My energy would start coming down, my brain would start getting foggy, I would start getting just really overly sensitive to everything. And so what I would do essentially was clean up all of my habits. I would clean up my diet, I would really alkalize my diet, I'd remove all toxins, eat really clean and fresh. And, specifically bad habits: sugar, caffeine, alcohol, these things that were just habits of my daily life. And when I would quit those for about 3 weeks, all of my symptoms would go away. And so not very maturely, I would just go right back to those habits again. I'd go right back to drinking coffee in the morning and, starting to eat more sugar, and then starting to have some beers, and everything seems fine for a few months, and then all of a sudden the symptoms would come back. I'd be fine for, maybe 6 months, 8 months sometimes even, and then the symptoms would start coming back for a week and start getting really bad, and then I'd change my habits. I'd clean up my diet again for about 3 weeks, and I'd get better, and I went through this cycle for about 3 years. And I was always able to get better once I spent 3 weeks really cleanly living, no caffeine, no sugar, no alcohol, no preservatives, that kind of a thing. But this was the stage where my situation became chronic, and just cleaning up my diet wasn't enough anymore. It didn't, when I started getting sick here, I cleaned up my diet just like always, but that wasn't helping. I continued to get more and more sick. So, looking at this date in particular, this was the sort of the final straw, and this was the day of sort of admitting to myself that I'm seriously in a bad health place, and I need to deal with it. I didn't know how yet. Lyme's a confusing thing, as anybody who's sort of dealt with Lyme specifically, but all autoimmune diseases are their own little trick, and modern society doesn't offer much to help, strangely enough. So, on this day, the thing that really stands out here is Saturn here at 4 degrees. So, my sun is at 4, almost 5 degrees of Taurus, opposite my moon, 2 2.5 degrees of Scorpio. So this Saturn had been coming across. It had already sort of made a pass by my moon, and it was opposing my sun on this day. And Saturn is the planet of restrictions and limitations and responsibility and hard work and effort and goals, but it really lowers your energy so that you refocus. It's about seriousness. It isn't about fun and games. That's not Saturn's concern. Isn't fun and games. It's about productivity, and it's about being responsible. It's about growing up. And I had been dealing with this disease like a kid. I'd been sort of pretending that I could just live life this weird back and forth. Rather than just cleaning up my diet forever, I would play this game where I was like, okay, I can quit for 3 weeks, feel better, and then go back to them, and these symptoms would come and go and come and go, as opposed to just making a more long-term adjustment to not only diet but lifestyle too, because at this point diet wasn't even enough. There was all sorts of factors going into my dis-ease, and this is the beginning of my depression. I'd been able to deal with all this Lyme disease pretty well and had kept my spirits up pretty good, considering I was sick and had to deal with a lot of crap from it, and it wasn't fun and none of that stuff. And so yeah, but I hadn't been like, I had a kid now, like I had to think about my long-term health so that I can be here long-term for my kid. Saturn expects me to be able to provide for her for a long time, and I can't do that if I'm totally sick. And so that was part of the beginning of this sort of deep depression. I hadn't been living up to my own sort of Saturn expectations of myself. And now Saturn's right on my moon, and it's my emotions and how I'm feeling, and it's sucking my emotions dry. Saturn's a very dry, cold and dry planet, and it restricts your emotional nurturing, and I definitely experienced that in life. I was very much alone on an island during this time, largely because my impetus to heal is holistically and not to just walk into a doctor and a Western modern doctor and say, "Fix me up, doctor." I don't put my blind faith into modern medicine. Let's just say that. I have a much more holistic approach and always have. And so when I got sick, I was going to take a holistic approach. And I was judged greatly for that. And it left me alone. Saturn is, restrictions. I just didn't have any nurturing in my life. There was some support, but none of it was emotional nurturing. No offense to anybody in my life, but everybody disappeared on me, and I earned that because I'm not a very consistent friend or family member. I don't stay in touch very well and all that stuff, and all of a sudden Saturn comes across my moon and I'm completely disconnected from that was the beginning of that depression, was being cut off from any sort of emotional there's no compassion. I felt no compassion for my situation. I was really, really sick, and all I felt was judgment. Saturn is judgment. And I was judging myself. I was feeling the judgment from other people. It was really, but I was sick as a dying dog, I didn't have any energy. I could barely walk 30 feet. When it got really bad at my worst, I was lifeless in so many ways. So that's all said. What else is going on this day? Why? What else